Well, the preview project had two major aims. One was to look at whether diet composition mattered when it comes to diabetes prevention, whether it mattered whether it was higher in protein and lower in carbohydrate, or whether the glycemic index of the carbohydrate mattered. And the second aim was to look at whether exercise intensity mattered. Does it mean that you have to exercise at a more intense rate than just moderate walking? Does that make a difference to diabetes prevention? In the randomized controlled trial, what we did was look at two diets. We compared two diets, one higher in protein and lower in GI. And the other diet was simply the conventional healthy diet, low fat. And then within each diet group, we divided the subjects into a higher intensity exercise regime or a lower intensity exercise regime, one equivalent to jogging for 15 minutes and the other equivalent to, say, walking for 30 minutes a day. Well, what we're showing at the ADA meeting is that we had a very low incidence of diabetes across the life of the study. So we were expecting that at least perhaps 20 in 100 would develop diabetes in 3 years because they had risk factors for diabetes. But in fact, because of the way we started the study with a milkshake diet for 8 weeks, they lost a huge amount of body weight. They lost 8% of their starting body weight in 8 weeks. And probably as a result of that major weight loss, at the end of 3 years, we had such a low incidence of diabetes that we didn't have the capacity to compare the two diets or the two exercise regimes. They were basically equivalent. So we will have to wait longer for more and more of them to develop diabetes over the years before we can actually validly compare the two diets and two exercises. The second thing we did in preview, apart from the randomized controlled trial, is we did these large population studies, a total of about 160,000 people altogether. So these are observational studies. And in those, what we found was that the higher the protein intake per kilogram of body weight at the start of the study, the lower the incidence of developing diabetes and the lower the prevalence of diabetes at the beginning. So we think there is a protein effect which is protective, at least at the levels that we're seeing, across the normal population. So we're not talking about very high protein, very low carbohydrate diets. We're looking at percentage of energy between, say, 10% and 25% of energy, which is relatively easy for most people to achieve. In previous randomized controlled trials, what we did was recruit people who had risk factors for developing diabetes. And those risk factors are called pre-diabetes. So they have a slightly higher fasting glucose, but not at the level you would see in someone with diabetes. And they have, if you give them a glucose tolerance test, which means you get them to drink 50 grams of glucose, after 2 hours, if that glucose level is above a certain level, but not indicative of diabetes, then this is called pre-diabetes. So we recruited those sorts of subjects, and they also had to have a body mass index above 25. And we did that because we wanted to see lots of people develop diabetes within the next 3 years, so within the length of the time we would study them. But of course, we excluded people with other kinds of problems as well, if they had thyroid disease, or if they were, many people actually were excluded in Australia because they were already taking diabetes medication, a drug called metformin. And so that immediately excluded them from the study, which is a shame. I think what we can say is that it's possible to prevent diabetes in most people, at least for these 3 years. And you might say we can delay it because it's possible in the future they will. But for every year you delay it, you reduce the chances of complications. And I think the big take-home message is that weight loss, a large amount of weight loss is needed. And we achieved double the level, even triple the level that has been achieved in previous diabetes studies or pre-diabetes studies. So the big message is that we used meal replacement shakes to achieve this kind of weight loss. And to be honest, at the beginning of the study, I didn't really think that meal replacements were a good replacement for normal healthy eating, so I wasn't someone who would recommend them. But at the end of the 8 weeks, I could just see the glee and the joy on the faces of the people who for a long time had never been this weight. Some of them went back to the weight they were when they were 20, 25. So milkshakes are a good way to lose weight, a large amount, and then you start the modification of behavior, diet and exercise. And you're starting with a brain that is so receptive to these new messages because they've lost so much weight and they want to stay that way. So it's a good way to do it.